Welcome everyone to Nanda Hobbs. Today we're going to be talking about still life painting, and I've got Jonathan Dalton here to have a chat. Jonathan's a very well known painter in Australia. He's been a multiple Archibald finalist, and also over recent years has really delved into contemporary still life paintings, allegorical, super fascinating, and often very amusing as well. What we thought we'd do is have a look at a couple of painters that we do some work with at Nanda Hobbs, but also investigate some very famous paintings from history. Unfortunately, we don't have the real things here, so we've delved into the archive of Google and come up with these excellent photocopies of some really extraordinary works, which we'll talk about as far as what is it about still life that's so fascinating. So, Jonathan, you're a portrait painter, but you're very well known for still life painting as well. What is it about still life that's captured your imagination?
I think one of the principal things about still life painting is even the notion of it being a still life. In my head, I don't view them as still lifes, I view them as paintings of objects or paintings of things. So it's examining the nature of things, and we own those things. So when you can use those things to sort of represent other ideas, then they sort of move on from just being mere representations of things into, exactly as you said, into allegorical sort of tales or stories about the people who own those things.
Is that something that's been there forever, that idea of storytelling?
I would certainly say yes. There was a brief period of only maybe 300 or 400 years where still life was at the bottom of this sort of hierarchy of genres.
So tell me about the hierarchy.
The hierarchy of genres was this idea sort of introduced in the middle, I want to say the middle of the 16th century, where at the very, very top you had historical or allegorical paintings. You moved down then into portrait paintings. You moved then into genre or sort of everyday paintings. Then you moved into landscape painting. Then you moved into, then you moved into animal paintings. And then finally at the very, very bottom of this was still life. And part of the nature of still life sort of at that time was it was seen as having no substance because it was just paintings of things. They couldn't really construct a hard and fast story. A lot of that had to do with whom was sort of commissioning the work, which would frequently be sort of very wealthy individuals associated with the church or the church themselves. So they wanted stories that taught a moral lesson.
So the Dutch were really big.
The Dutch were actually the people who sort of almost broke it out of that mold. So as soon as the Dutch East Indies came along and the Dutch had freed themselves from Spanish rule, and you had this incredibly wealthy trading empire, which was principally the beginning-ish of the middle classes, they wanted paintings of subjects that they could recognize. And one of the roles of still life true sort of history is you're hijacking the ability of nature to mass reproduce objects. You know, at this point in time, people didn't mass reproduce objects, nature did. So if you could paint an apple and it looked like an apple, then you knew that was a good painter. If they could paint a glass, if they could get, the visuals correct in glass, then they were a good painter. So frequently, still lifes were put out into the world so that painters could demonstrate their skills.
Like advertising. Almost.
Exactly like advertising,
yeah.
But using sort of nature as the kind of like, oh, that looks like an apple, I recognize that, and So then they would get into the more lucrative field of either historical paintings or portrait painting, which is where there was a lot more money. But then the Dutch came along and they had this incredibly wealthy trading empire. They were bringing in objects for the first time from all over the world, things that people had never seen before. So then it almost became sort of advertising in the sense of, here is a desirable object, I'm going to paint a picture of it. So hijacking the beauty of the object itself. And another byproduct of this idea of the genres of painting was that for a long time still life painting was considered sort of women's art, even though many male artists, of which there'd be many, of course, male artists in comparison to female artists, is that women weren't allowed to study anatomy. If they did actually get to go to one of the academies.
Studio.
Well, no, if they got to go to one of the academies, it was sort of considered insensitive to their sensibilities, so they weren't taught how to paint people, so they were sort of refined to those lesser genres. And I think a lot of that was a hangover into modern art from the middle of the middle of the 19th century. So we've got a couple of examples here. After my very brief and inaccurate history of still life painting, is sort of, if we're going to go back to the beginning of what we kind of consider sort of Renaissance into post-Renaissance painting. You got a beautiful image by Caravaggio, this very, very delicate, very, very realistic painting of a basket of fruit, which is maybe what people view still life, certainly, I've certainly done bowls and bowls of fruit, is what we see still lifes as. In there, you have that idea of impermanence because Caravaggio painted these fruit with holes and rotting and so on in them. Then you're moving down into, this is Ambrosius Bosschaert, which is that classical Dutch, high Dutch painting, very, very beautifully painted, exquisitely rendered, but a beautiful thing and sort of seen as having no greater story in it. As time progressed, more and more objects were put in there to reveal even more than, in fact, there's a whole language around Dutch still lifes. If if you're so inclined, you can almost read a story in there. So the story of paintings come into it. Then you go into what I would almost call classical painting, a painting by a French painter called Antoine Vallon, and it's a man of butter. Very, very similar in style and technique to Paul Ryan's.
Quite abstract too, in a way.
Very, very abstract. And then when you move into sort of contemporary still life, which at this point still life is still looked down upon in the sort of traditional art world, you have Morandi doing these objects that become almost abstracted. It's almost a plane of colour. Then you've got Georgia O'Keeffe, who's, if you compare her flowers to Ambrosius's flowers, and then you've got someone like Picasso, a little known artist from Spain, and he's also doing still life. And it was a way of showing people a style of painting with objects that they would instantly recognise. So it's almost a celebration of the style as well as it is of the objects.
And allowing people into the artist's mind as far as into the studio or the little setup, do you think there's a connection there that people can hold on to rather than, say, the tradition of the high art, the history painting that you might see in grand palaces or churches?
Absolutely. I think there's, in fact, you're almost double dipping as an artist, because not only do you get to express it in the style, but you get to choose what's going in there. You go out into nature and you're painting the landscape, and even though you might impose your style on it, it still is the landscape which exists, sort of separate to the individual. If you're painting a portrait, very, very important that you catch, particularly at this time, that you catch a likeness of the person or an essence of the person. So again, you're limited in what you can do with it. People, of course, like Picasso came along and did it in a separate way. But someone like Morandi, all of his paintings are very much about those objects, which is an expression of himself, an expression of the style, an expression of sort of almost, in this case, of pure colour. It's
something that's become, I know we've talked in the past, that's become quite a contemporary idea that with the advent of iPhones and photography and all that sort of thing, that so many people are taking their own or making their own still lives all the time.
100%. I think anyone who's taken a picture of their breakfast in some beautiful place for brunch and then posted it on Instagram, you're a still life photographer. And there's something inherent, I think, in human beings that we love, that celebration of abundance, of things looking sort of sumptuous, delicious, and that whole sort of excess, which Instagram very much ties into. Look how good I have it, and look how much of it I have. So there is something inherent, and there always has been, about people wanting to celebrate the food that they have.
It's quite fascinating too when you talk about the idea of abundance, because the tradition of Dutch landscape painting also talked about this idea of vanitas, that whilst you can have everything and you can look how special my life is because of all these beautiful things, but you can't take it with you.
No.
So there are always little clues, or very often always little clues.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it is quite interesting with a couple of the other paintings here. The Leslie Rice painting on the end of this collection here, very difficult to see, let me tell you, but we'll put up an image. He's, apart from being a fabulous painter, also works in the tradition of tattoo artists as well, but he paints on velvet and has this very sumptuous, almost kitsch element to his work. And this particular still life really delves into the idea of vanitas. So it has a skull in there, which is the classic memento mori.
Yep.
You know, all things come to an end. And I think we even get a touch of it with the chops by Paul Ryan.
Absolutely, yeah.
You mentioned the similarity to the butter, this really viscous way that Paul goes about painting. And Paul did a residency of all things in a butcher's shop. And it just the rawness of it, I think, really translates very, very well. Marie Mansfield's still lives here, talking about the fracturing of life.
Well, you told me the story of these are objects that came out of an earthquake, things that were in her, objects that were in her parents' house.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, when they arrived in Australia from the earthquake, they were chipped and shattered and all sorts of things. And she's recontextualised and put them together. So
you're having that sort of wonderful opportunity to tell a story with the objects themselves. It's not just that they're a thing and they're nice to look at. The fact that they're cracked sort of, begs the question: how did they crack? Why are they cracked? Is there something?
It becomes so much more, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I think it's one of the really interesting things about art, and something that I'm always banging on to people about, is what does the painting give you sometime down the track? So in 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or a generation's time, are we going to be able to find something new and exciting about the work, or does it spark something in your head? And so with Marie's work there, the very fine cracks through the china, which undoubtedly is annoying, opens up an entire world of investigation and conversation around it.
I think as well, the sort of the imperfection, those cracks. I'm a big believer in imperfection is a way of expressing beauty. If something is too perfect, it sort of lacks those qualities which elevate it into true beauty, in my opinion, of course. And then having those cracks means that it is then a beautiful thing, because there's something more to investigate. And the imperfection against the perfection is what sort of elevates it into that next level of something beautiful, I think.
Speaking of that, let's talk about your painting here, because well documented around imperfection, perfection, and all that sort of thing. This work, obviously a classic still life in very much the idea of Caravaggio. But let's go. Let's talk about this.
Sure. I'm a big believer in, sort of one of the elements that tends to sort of bubble through all of my still lifes is the role of sort of human-made, man-made objects versus naturally made objects. We touched on it briefly, the idea of mass reproduction, whether the means be artificial or whether the means be man-made. So here you have a Wedgwood bowl. Josiah Wedgwood was one of the first pioneers of mass reproduction. His objects, which was sort of the 1700s, his objects were the first idea of a factory line, of where you made something beautiful but almost on a factory floor. Still all handmade, but there was a process there, kind of like you do this part, you do this part, you do this part. So it was one of the first objects of having mass reproduction, man-made mass reproduction, versus a grape. You know what a grape looks like, but no two grapes look alike. So the idea that in natural objects, we don't want perfection. We want imperfection. In man-made objects, they have to be perfect. If they're not, they're rejected. So in many of my other still lifes, I use kitchen reject objects. I go to the kitchen reject shop and I find objects that are being thrown away or sort of discounted heavily because they are imperfect objects. Further to that, you then get the idea of these individuals. This is the idea of hijacking something which is beautiful and then sort of using something beautiful to further elevate the work that it's in, is these classical figures, these Greek figures. And those Greek figures in my head are sort of propping up our idea of Western civilization. For most of history following the fall of the Roman Empire, which idolized Greek culture, and then Roman culture was in turn idealized throughout the Middle Ages, well up into the Renaissance and the 17th and 18th century, is using those figures as a way of sort of an allegorical tale that they are propping up what we see as Western civilization. And so within this, you've got a couple of chess pieces. One of them is very, very, very visible, sort of pointing out above everything else. The other one I've intentionally almost hidden so that it disappears amongst, as it were, the fruits of their labour. Because of the nature of the society that we have, frequently the pawns, the little people, are lost, and then elevated above that are, in this case, royalty, which is this particular piece is a queen. Those chess pieces are also themselves antiques from the, I want to say, from the 18th century that I found in an antique shop. So the idea of using something very, very old with something quite old with something that's literally come out of the earth has a beautiful symmetry to it. So you can use those chess pieces as a story-making device. The bowl itself is a story-making device, and then grapes, which have such a significant cultural value as well as economic value here in Australia, sort of renowned for its wine, all combine to tell a story. You spoke about what makes someone link to a painting. I'm a big believer in, if you stand in front of a painting and you have any sort of emotional reaction to it, that's where you start. And everything else is sort of built upon that. You need to have that emotional connection to a painting. I sometimes call, sort of photorealism, although I don't call myself a photorealist, so I can see what people would, as a very lazy way of painting, because you're painting objects exactly as they appear, and you're not giving too much extra to it. However, you can then use the objects to elevate it from just a mere likeness into something hopefully a little bit more profound, a little bit more beautiful, a little bit more of a story attached to it.
I think that's the absolute critical part of all of this. Painting is about making a connection with people, or artwork is generally. And one of the things we've been talking about all the way through this time that we're living in is the ability for people to engage with objects and ideas around them, and making them, because they've got more time potentially, to think about things in a far greater way. And so thank you very much, Jonathan, for the opportunity to listen to you speak about this incredibly interesting genre of painting.
I hope I've changed your mind a little bit.
No. It is fascinating. All the way through my career in art, I've always oscillated from disliking something to passionately being involved in it, whether it be still life or landscape or portraiture or whatever it is. And I think that is the fabulous journey that is learning about art. And the critical thing about art is that you're never going to know everything there is to know.
Absolutely.
So it is that ongoing conversation. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.